Coming up on Tech News Weekly, Jason Howell and I talk to David Ruddock of Esper about that Google and Sonos battle. Well, it's not so much a battle anymore because there is a ruling, and we need an explanation for what's going on between these smart speaker makers. Then James Thomson, the creator of PCalc, stops by to talk about dealing with clones in the App Store and a little bit about that whole Wordle clone situation. Before we round things out with our stories of the week, first is Jason, who talks about messaging with Google's SMS, MMS, and RCS, and Apple's iMessage. What do we do about green bubble and blue bubble texting? And then I talk a little bit about disinformation and misinformation and a few open letters from fact checkers and experts around the world who say, enough is enough, Spotify and YouTube. We need to do something about this. Stay tuned, because this is a great episode of Tech News Weekly.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
This is Tech News Weekly, episode 217, recorded Thursday, January 13th, 2022. This episode of Tech News Weekly is brought to you by BetterHelp. Join over 1 million people who have taken charge of their mental health. As a listener, you'll get 10% off your first month by visiting betterhelp.com/TNW.
And by Streak, whether you're tracking sales, fundraising, hiring, or support, Streak is a CRM that will help you stay on top of all your processes directly inside Gmail. Get 20% off your first year of their Pro plan, the most popular option, by going to streak.com/TNW.
And by Acronis. Avoid downtime, data loss, and security breaches at a lower cost with Acronis Cyber Protect. Go to go.acronis.com/twit-2 to get a 30-day trial to modernize your cybersecurity and backup with integrated cyber protection.
Hello, and welcome to Tech News Weekly, the show where every week we talk to and about the people making and breaking the tech news. I am one of your hosts, Micah Sargent.
And I'm the other guy, Jason Howell. Good to see you, Micah.
Good to see you.
Good to see you, even though my fingertips feel like they're going to fall off. They're so freaking cold. Show me your fingers. You wear something to protect.
Yeah, I've got some compression gloves on. I can actually feel the tips of my fingers.
But yes, that must be nice.
We both have that issue with our long limbs. It does.
Exactly.
It does give us trouble.
It's nice to be seen like that. It's nice to be understood. Let's get into some non-fingerless glove tech news. Google and Sonos have been duking it out for at least a couple of years now. There's been a patent case going on. Maybe you've heard of it, maybe you haven't. It's been happening, and we finally have kind of the resolution. Let's just say Google at this point is eating some crow. But what exactly does it mean for its hardware division going forward? That's what we're going to talk about with David Ruddock, editor-in-chief at Esper. Welcome back to the show, David, and Happy New Year.
Thanks for having me. I'm always excited to be here, Jason. It's my favorite place to be.
Excellent. Your favorite place. Okay, well, then I guess every single week we're going to have to – no, I won't do that to you.
Yeah, on the internet.
Every other week.
I mean – not, this show specifically.
Right. Well, thanks, man. It's always great to get to talk to you. And this case is interesting, I think, for the implications of some of the devices that we already have in our homes and for the future. But let's kind of take a little bit of a step back. And by the way, I just saw your musings on Twitter. That's why I reached out to you, and I love your perspective on everything Android. But I saw what you were tweeting out about this, and so that's the reason that I pulled you on, is to talk a little bit about what's behind this case. What exactly was Sonos charging initially a couple of years ago when they said, hey, Google's infringing on our patents? Do we have any clarity at this point, especially about what that impact actually was on Sonos?
So, I mean, in terms of the impact on Sonos, their position is, of course, that they've lost market opportunity because Google has introduced products that use features that utilize Sonos intellectual property. And so Sonos has lost sales. And that's generally how you approach an intellectual property case like this. And I will just say I'm not a lawyer, But in terms of tech IP, that's what you're looking at usually. Is Sonos is saying we could have sold more speakers if not for Google taking this piece of intellectual property that makes what Sonos is special. And in this case, a lot of that came down to these patents that were before the ITC that relate to really group volume control of all things. So that is really where Sonos decided to focus in on this case. Now, if you want to zoom out, though, outside those specific patents, for Sonos, this is really an outpouring of basically the fact that they worked with Google a long time ago to ensure interoperability of products, and they feel that Google took advantage of that cooperation to then recreate Sonos features on its own products.
So then would you say that a ruling of this kind where the U.S. International Trade Commission has basically said, all right, we rule that Google is guilty of infringing on these patents, is that also in some way a affirmation that Google actually did have this meeting with Sonos? Sonos shows them some of the stuff that they're working on. Then Google says, oh, we're going to use it and we're not going to, pay you for it or rope you into a deal. Or this is just specifically about the patent saying, hey, Sonos had a great idea and you also did that great idea. We have no clarity around that, do we?
No, not really. And I don't know that we ever will. That's the kind of thing you're going to see in emails between product managers and execs and, talking about what they're doing. There's all those classic Microsoft emails back in the day, right, of them just saying, we should steal this. I don't necessarily think Google is quite so brazen, but I imagine this is political. It's philosophical, too. These two companies have very different views on what protected intellectual property in this particular situation is. Google's view to me is very similar to the stance it took with Oracle back in the day when Oracle was suing to essentially stop Android. Oracle wanted royalties on every piece of Android, and Google said, no, we believe that in spirit, the spirit of the law says we are not violating the law, even if you technically may have something of a case here. And they won. The Supreme Court agreed with them and said that they created new law. Now, the Sonos case is different because they're before the ITC. You can't appeal the ITC's ruling to the Supreme Court, at least as far as I understand, outside a few very specific areas where the Supreme Court might have jurisdiction on such a thing. But in general, you have the president to appeal to in this case. And I don't think he's going to be doing anything about that.
Yeah, probably not top of mind right now. Oh, yeah, you're right. Those speakers should have group volume changing. You're right. Let's get right on this. One thing that came up on All About Android, we talked about this on Tuesday, was just the idea that there are certain patents that I can't remember the phrasing of it, but right, like a patent is protectable if it's like a very unique idea. And to me, it's not very unique to think that if I have a stereo pair of speakers, that both of the volume on both of those speakers should be controllable with a single slider. But maybe that's just obvious because somebody created that innovation and now it just feels obvious. But I don't know. I'm curious to know your take on that because I don't know what is the alternative that every single speaker that we control, and what I'm talking about, by the way, is kind of some of the direct impact that we're going to see on these speakers that we already have and the speakers that are shipping out in the future, is that all of the independent volumes have to be controlled individually. That just kind of breaks down for me when you're talking about a stereo pair, and I don't know if I'm looking too deeply into it, but what do you think?
I think that for Sonos, the issue for them is just like how Google did it, and they looked at the implementation and said, they feel this feels a lot like what we do, and they probably then started to take it apart and do some opposition research and figure out, okay, how did they create this? And at that point, that's probably when legal got involved because somebody probably flagged it and said, hey, this feels like somebody could have taken this from us. And I think that in tech, that is what gets so blurry. Things can very much look and feel like they were taken from another product or service, but you can arrive at the same solution using the same tools or similar tools to the same problem. And in that case, you can say it's coincidence, but if you're before a court, you have to be able to convince them that not only is it coincidence, essentially that you serendipitously arrived at a similar solution, but that there was no way they could have influenced you, and that there's not a lot of evidence to suggest that there's good evidence to suggest you created this in a vacuum. If Google had created this functionality in a totally total clean room kind of development environment and they could prove that, they'd have a better case probably. But they didn't, and they won't be able to prove that because tech is messy. People move between companies. They take ideas and ways of thinking with them. And that, to me, is why all of this is so confusing and why I think you don't see a lot of people taking Sonos or Google's side here because it's complicated. And it's not really clear that one of them has a moral high ground or one of them has a practical or technical high ground that's better for development or the community. This is very much, like I said, it's philosophical. It's about what they believe.
Some of what you tweeted about in the thread that I read had to do with the import of devices versus the, if the devices were manufactured in the U.S. Would there be a difference? Like, is this specific to devices being imported, Google's own devices being imported because they're manufactured outside of the United States? Would it be different if they were manufacturing these devices in the U.S.? Would that be an easy fix, or does that not matter?
It would. So it would be an easy fix.
Easy, by the way, in air quotes, right? Like that wouldn't be easy at all. But anyways,
it would be easy in the sense that Sonos would have to sue them in a U.S. district court or the Federal Circuit of Appeals. Or the Federal District Circuit Court, excuse me, because they can hear these novel IP cases at that appeals level. So it's not really a question of, Sonos, for its part, has an advantage with the ITC in the sense that the ITC is not answerable to a higher judicial body once their decision is rendered. It's answerable to the executive branch because it's a function of the executive branch. So if Sonos had been forced to bring this, say, to the Eastern District of Texas, the Rocket Docket District, where you see all of these tech lawsuits filed, they would then have to get the judgment, and then there would be an appeals process, and you would appeal to the Federal Circuit of Appeals, and then it probably would or could go to the Supreme Court, and Google would be able to keep delaying them, essentially. So the ITC is a really quick way to create a really actionable decision. Now, if you lose, you're kind of stuck, right? Like you can't really go back to another court and say, well, the ITC didn't want to give us an injunction. Will you? That court's going to say, well, probably not. They looked at this. So if Google manufactured products in the US, the jurisdiction and venue would change. But in terms of the outcome, it's really hard to say.
Yeah, super hard to say. What do you think this has to do from a broader perspective? Is there any tie in here with this? And, we're going to talk later in the show as far as the kind of the messaging story from this year, or from this week. Sometimes feels like a year, if not beyond, when you're talking about Google messaging. Anyways, about like RCS and everything, but about leadership and the fact that, just yesterday on This Week in Google, Mike Elgin was on, and Mike Elgin, in many shows over the past few years, I would say, keeps kind of pointing back to Sundar Pichai and saying, you know what, like time and time again, there are these examples of Google faltering on pretty major ways, with its hardware division, in all different directions. And it really all points back to a lack of strong leadership from Sundar Pichai. Or maybe that happens to be Rick Osterloh because he's the one that heads up the hardware department at Google. But how do you feel about that? Is something like this evidence of that point, or that's its own island?
That's difficult for me to say because the other thing to remember is that in any legal dispute like this, Google has the world's biggest target painted on its back, right? They are one of the deepest pockets you could possibly reach into. And that's the same reason Oracle chased them so long about the Java virtual machine in Android, even though that case wasn't very strong particularly. So I think that for Google, it's not necessarily a leadership issue in my mind. It's more that Google, I think, has kind of a friendlier way of looking at, product creation, development, and competition and cooperation. They want to be friends with everyone. They want products to work together well. And I think they do that well sometimes, but the double-edged sword there is really Google is always looking at what's happening out in the ecosystem because they have so many partners out there and they're getting inspiration. And so inspiration and, unwanted appropriation is a massive gray area. So it may be that Google said, Sonos is doing something really cool here. We like the idea. We think we can do it better. And we think we can build it across a whole ecosystem of products, what customer wouldn't want that? And so I think that you can have product get out ahead there because, I mean, realistically, it's not like every time Google decides we're going to build a software feature or a software product, they send it up to legal and say, hey, can you guys sign off on this and do a full brief and make sure it's okay to build? That's just not how the world works.
Yeah, interesting stuff. And I will say, when those features came out on particularly on Google Home devices, like that was top of mind for me. It was like, oh, usually you'd have to spend multiple hundreds of dollars to get this functionality. Now I just need to get a couple of these little pucks and I can do it, and it's just as good. So, I mean, there's obviously overlap there. That's obviously why this case even saw the light of day. So, David Ruddock, always appreciate your time and your insight. Of course, Esper.io. Tell us a little bit about it and where people can find you.
Yeah, and actually, we'll have a post up about this tomorrow on the Esper blog and how Google's changed Android to respond to this dispute, because they've made some platform level changes. So if you go to blog.esper.io, you can see our content there. You can also check out Esper if you're interested in building an Android device. We can help you out.
Nice. Right on. Thanks for everything you do, David. Appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for having me. Bye-bye.
All right. Take care. All right, up next, you remember Wordle from just last week? We talked about it on the show. Yeah, so do an impressive amount of copycats. And we're going to talk all about the complicated world of Wordle copycats and more coming up next. But first, this episode of Tech News Weekly is brought to you by BetterHelp. BetterHelp is, it's right there in the title. It's all about helping you through life, right? Because sometimes we just need help to get from point A to point B. Maybe something's preventing you from achieving your goals. Maybe something's interfering with your happiness. And all you have to do is check out betterhelp.com/TNW. BetterHelp's awesome. I've used it. It's a super easy to initiate platform to get kind of connected with a licensed professional therapist that can help you work through whatever you have going on in your life. I mean, they cover so many facets. They're going to assess your needs. They're going to match you with your own licensed professional therapist. And then if you find that you just aren't gelling with that therapist, they make it really easy for you to switch and try someone else. Overall, ultimately getting you paired up with the right one for you. You can connect in a safe and private online environment. It's super convenient. You can start communicating in less than 48 hours. Now, this is not a crisis line. It's not self-help. It is professional counseling, and it's all done securely online. So it's allowing you to do what normally you'd have to, hop in the car, drive down to the office, wait in the lobby, all of these things. Now we're so used to doing so much online via, virtually via Zoom and other platforms. It's a no-brainer. Like we are primed and ready for this now. You can send a message to your counselor anytime. You're going to get timely and thoughtful responses. Plus, you can schedule weekly video or phone sessions. Really up to you. You don't have to do video if you don't want to. All without ever having to sit in that waiting room. BetterHelp is committed to facilitating great therapeutic matches. So like I said, they make it super easy and, by the way, free if you want to change counselors as needed. It's more affordable than traditional offline counseling, and financial aid is actually available. The service is available for clients worldwide, and you can find the particular expertise you need online. So you're not limiting yourself. And this is a huge benefit to the counselors that are located near you. You're not only using the counselors and the therapists that are in your town or within like 15 minutes of you, right? You've got the whole spread of the world of qualified counselors to tap into. You're going to find licensed professional counselors who specialize in all different aspects of mental health, depression, stress, anxiety, anger, trauma, relationships, LGBTQ matters, self-esteem, family conflicts. I mean, you name it. You're going to find someone that can really focus on what you have going on and help you work through it. Anything you share is confidential, of course. It's convenient, it's professional, and it's affordable. And you can actually check out testimonials posted daily on their site. In fact, so many people have been using BetterHelp that they're actually recruiting additional counselors in all 50 states. So if I'm talking to you, you'll know it. Check out BetterHelp for that reason as well. I I want you to start living a happier life today. As a listener, you're going to get 10% off your first month when you visit our sponsor at betterhelp.com/TNW, and you can join over 1 million people who have taken charge of their mental health. It really does change your life. Again, that's BetterHelp, HELP.com/TNW, and we thank them for their support of Tech News Weekly. All right, Mike, over to you.
All right. So last week, during my story of the week, I brought up the word game Wordle. It is a website you go to, powerlanguage.co.uk/Wordle. And the developer of the game made this game for his partner starting out. And then it got very popular. People started playing it. And since then, we've seen a lot of people sharing. In case you still haven't gotten to the Wordle thing yet, you may have seen a lot of squares showing up on Twitter of different colors, and that was related to this game called Wordle. Shortly after that, I think one of the things that's kind of been an issue is that people are a little cheeky. And so they've been sharing these squares maybe without context. And it's one of those things where it's almost like a social test. Can you figure out what everybody's into? Can you go and find it? So people then finally come across Wordle. They type it into their search bar thinking it's an app. And they find this game called the Wordle app in the App Store. Turns out that's just a copy of the game, and this game itself actually had a premium version that you could subscribe to and pay some amount of dollars per year. The person who developed this game was in no way related to, had anything to do with the person who made the online game. And there was some kind of conversation about the way that the developer who made the app game handled things, where they were kind of going along and talking about every single step of the process and how much money they were making and how many people were signing up. And all in all, it kind of put a bad taste in people's mouths. Since that time, the developer of the game has apologized in some ways, and there's also been kind of a mass reduction in the number of Wordle clones on the App Store because the developer of the true game, the true original game, has not made it an app. It's just an online game. The developer said, hey, I want this to just be a free thing with no ads, et cetera, et cetera. But there were a whole bunch of copycats that came into the App Store, and I imagine that there will continue to be as things go on. So I was sitting there kind of thinking about this, and I thought, I need to talk to somebody who has an app in the App Store and has been in the App Store for a while, and who could talk about kind of the state of the App Store a little bit, the dealing with clones, et cetera, et cetera. So all of that long introduction to the story is to welcome our guest today, James Thomson, maker of PCalc, the Dice app by PCalc, and a number of other awesome apps, as well as sort of in-apps that exist. James Thomson, welcome back to the show, I believe. I believe you've been on the show, definitely on the network before. Welcome, James.
I've definitely been on the network. It's nice to see you again in person.
Yes, good to see you too. So let's start things off with the question that I actually asked you over message about you having an app in the App Store. I asked, have you ever dealt with copycats yourself? And you had an interesting answer for me.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things if you search for PCalc that will come up. One of them is an app called PCalc Box, which is basically a fake calculator that you can hide photos in. And I'm sure there's legitimate reasons for hiding photos away, but I can think of certainly some obvious use cases for that. There's another app called PCal, which is basically a tracker for bowel movements. And certainly PCalc Box, I imagine, was named so that when people search for PCalc, a calculator, they'll see that one as well. And I'm not overjoyed about it, but it's not the kind of thing where, I'm going to be reaching for a lawyer.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, the stuff with Wordle, I think, is a little more blatant than that.
Yes. And that's what I wanted to ask you about, because I think that we kind of have a differentiation because when the App Store first came out, 100 different people made their own lighter app. And so you could, flick the lighter and it would, just by shaking your phone or by swiping up on the screen. And then there were the people who made the fart apps, and there, a dozen different fart apps, and then 100 different fart apps, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. My question for you is, and I realize that I'm simplifying things, but that's on purpose because I would like to hear your take as a developer on what makes this particularly egregious in comparison to, 10 different people making Scrabble apps, for example.
Well, I think the thing with this is that they were using the name, the trademark that Josh Wardle had come up with, and they were deliberately doing it because there wasn't an app on the store, and they thought, get in quick, get an app up. People who hear about Wordle will look for it, they'll find their app, and, maybe they'll make some money. And so they're kind of coming at this really with a sort of bad faith approach to it. I mean, like the developer of the one that we've been talking about kind of became the main character of indie dev Twitter yesterday because he subsequently apologized and he said that he wouldn't do anything like this again. But I think his approach was, well, it's just business. I'm doing this, I'll get in, I'll make some money. And I think there's certainly the more established developers don't like this kind of thing, because it gives us a bad name. We're trying to make our own original apps, and I don't even like to look at any of the apps by competitors of mine because I don't want to see, if somebody's got a great idea, I don't want to see it and go, oh, well, that's a great idea, I should just put that in my own app. So, I try to do things somewhat in a vacuum. And I mean, the other thing is, I would say that there's obviously a spectrum of these things. There's the things. I mean, this was a functional app. You could play the game, and it's hard. I wouldn't describe it as a scam as such. It's definitely infringing trademarks or whatever. But there are things that are just out and out. They do nothing, and there's through various means, you can get these apps in front of people and make money. And so I think there's lots of different types of problems on the App Store, and this is just one of them.
Yeah, it violated kind of the spirit of the thing, and it also violated a more kind of obvious rule that exists. And so I think that was kind of the problem with this one, is that there were multiple party fouls, so to speak. And that's kind of what made this stick out. Because yes, you did see the developer kind of celebrating the money that they were making. They clearly were jumping on something that existed. And if you look at the developers' blog posts in the past and kind of their history on Twitter and elsewhere, you see that this is an individual who tends to be focused on the financial side of things, like get rich quick on this app and then move on to the next thing. And that does feel a little bit outside of the spirit of what this game was itself, and then what developers like you are putting your stuff out there for. Does that feel accurate?
Yeah. I mean, there is literally app review guidelines that say, don't copy apps, don't use another app's name, and and Apple. So I think one of the things that people have said is that Apple is profiting from all these apps, so they don't have the impetus to deal with them. There was one going through Twitter last week, I think, which had made over $1 million or something.
Oh,
it was clearly a scam. But I don't think there is this sort of big conspiracy that Apple, is just happy to let this stuff live on the store. I don't think Apple wants scams really any more than developers do. I think the problem is cracking down on this stuff at scale. There's literally, I think it's somewhere between 4 and 5 million apps on the store currently. And I think it's got to be quite difficult dealing with that. And you've got like people say, Apple should just have a special ops team that deals with scams, and that's like their entire job. And yeah, that makes sense. And I kind of have to assume that exists already. And it's really just a problem of resources. And a lot of teams in Apple are a lot smaller than you might think they are. And yeah, so I think it would be good if somebody high up said, we really need to deal with this stuff. We need to resource a group properly to look after this. But, I think there are other things that Apple could do to improve things, but it's a difficult problem.
It absolutely is. And I mean, this has kind of been the example of that. After this one really got blasted all over Twitter, then we did see Apple moving quickly to remove clones from the App Store. And I think that this is a good time to talk, too, about Apple's ad marketplace on the App Store, because I'm curious, as a developer, if I type in calculator at me as a non-developer, I go to the App Store, I type in calculator, I see PCalc. That makes sense. I'm there looking for a calculator. But what if I type in JCalc, which I don't know that exists, but let's just say that was one of your competitors, and then in that instance, should PCalc come up? Because I am technically searching for a calculator. Do developers kind of use that as a means to to help get new customers? Are they kind of playing against their opponents in that way? And is that like a standard practice?
So, yeah, this is an interesting question, very. I think when search ads were first introduced, they were kind of Apple's way of trying to fix some of the discovery problems with the App Store. And the idea being that, if you have an app that does X, you just pay for whatever keywords and you can try and get it in front of people. The problem is that, this is also a way to get your scammy apps in front of people by paying. But it's... So if you search for PCalc, you will see a variety of different things. Some are adverts for, other calculators, obviously. What I don't know is how much of that is people explicitly putting PCalc in as one of the keywords for the thing, or the App Store mechanisms saying, oh, well, this person's kind of looking for a calculator. I can tell that it's got the word calc in it, so I'm going to show them these other things. And I am absolutely sure that there is some of the stuff where you search for a very specific app, like, Twitterific or whatever, and you will see other apps that have probably advertised against that keyword. And it's also like, if somebody searches for PCalc and it brings up PCalc, and it doesn't, because I don't do adverts. I did it initially, and then I decided it felt like a bit like I was being shaken down. But back then, if somebody searched for PCalc and then clicked on the advert, rather than clicking on the PCalc that was underneath it, which is the actual entry in the store, I would get charged money. And I was getting a lot of people searching for the word PCalc, clicking the advert, and then it was just costing me money. And yeah, I think, like, when I was thinking about this, I would say the one thing that I would do is I would get rid of the whole search advertising business, because making discovery on the App Store a profit center for Apple is definitely not. It doesn't like push things in the right direction. I mean, App Store editorial themselves does great work, and I say this partially because they have featured PCalc many times over the years. But they are also that it's a small team again, and you're dealing with millions of apps. But the search stuff, it's just like, I think the guy who came up with the clone app even said this on Twitter. He was like, I didn't even need. He said he didn't need to make an app called Wordle. He could have called it something else, but then just bought the Wordle search term, and that would still get lots of people to see the app. And it's difficult because, if you've got a small app, like say there's a young developer starting out and they've got a calculator app, which is better than mine, and they want to get it in front of people, should I be able to say, well, no, you can't do that? I mean, I don't like the fact that, using a trademark as a search term is a thing that Apple allows, but that's a thing that kind of Google adverts went through a long time ago, and kind of decided that it was a legitimate use. But yeah, it rubs me the wrong way. And yeah, I've kind of just opted out of all the advertising stuff as much as I possibly can.
Absolutely. Well, James, I've got one off-topic question for you before we let you go. Someone in the chat wants to know if you are going to make a Windows version of PCalc at any point.
So I get this question a lot, and I get it for Android too. And the problem is that, like, it's just me writing this stuff. I don't have the skills or the time, really. I mean, it's enough. It's enough just trying to keep up with what Apple does on a daily, weekly basis. That maintaining and having Windows stuff is quite, would be an additional, additional things to learn and look after.
Absolutely.
And all that. But the other problem is most of my code uses a lot of Apple technology very specifically. It's written in Objective-C and Swift, and it uses Apple's libraries and engines and stuff. So with any of these apps, I would effectively be starting from scratch. And that's a lot to do. So this is a very long-winded way of me justifying the fact that I'm saying no. It's highly unlikely that there's going to be PCalc or Dice on any other platforms other than Apple's, just because the logistics and the technology behind it makes it quite hard.
That makes sense. Well, James Thomson, thank you so much for providing your perspective here today. Where can folks go if they want to follow you online and also check out your awesome apps?
Best place to find myself on Twitter, it's James Thomson, and that's Thompson without a P. And PCalc.com has a link to all my apps.
Awesome. Thank you so much, James.
Anytime.
All righty. That brings an end to that part of the show. Up next, blue bubbles, green bubbles, RCS, MMS, and SMS. Look, there's a lot to talk about. But first, this episode of Tech News Weekly is brought to you by Streak. As a startup founder or entrepreneur, you know what it's like running your business from your inbox. Whether you're tracking sales, fundraising, hiring, or working on support, Streak is a CRM that will help you stay on top of all of your processes directly inside Gmail. Use Streak's free email tools to check if your emails have been opened and send bulk emails with automated follow-up emails to improve your response rates. Since Streak is built inside of Gmail, it's part of your everyday workflow. You can see details about your leads, customers, and investors alongside your email, so there's no more switching between Gmail and other tools. Whether you're prospecting for new customers, raising a fundraising round, growing your team, or managing support tickets, you can use Streak pipelines to track all your processes directly from Gmail. Getting started is very easy. You just set up your first pipeline in 2 minutes and customize each pipeline based on your needs. Streak makes it easy to collaborate by automatically sharing emails and notes with anyone on your team. Streak was recognized as Google's Technology Partner of the Year and is used by thousands of founders, entrepreneurs, and small business owners. It's well worth checking out Streak. I think that the whole pipeline idea is really kind of a nifty way of thinking about things and going in and setting things up just as you need them and not having to bounce between windows and tabs and all over the place. Just have that locked right in there, all of it available on one screen. That's the dream. Try out Streak today. It's free to use on your own, or use the Pro plan with your team. Get 20% off your first year of their Pro plan, their most popular option, by going to streak.com/TNW. That's streak.com/TNW for 20% off. That's right. No fancy spelling here. Streak, streak.com/TNW. Check it out. Again, free to use on your own, so might as well give it a go. Thank you, Streak, for sponsoring this week's episode of Tech News Weekly. Jason Howell, tell me about your story of the week.
Oh, you set it up perfectly. Green bubbles, blue bubbles, RCS, MMS, SMS, all sorts of letters and complicated, weird things. It shouldn't have to be complicated, but apparently it is. And in 2022, I think it's probably pretty safe to say, if it wasn't already, Apple has won the messaging wars, at least as far as, the platform kind of specific messaging, at least in the US anyways. A lot of people outside of the US would be like, what are you talking about? Way more Android devices. Everybody's using WhatsApp, whatever the case may be. But in the US, Apple is really reigning supreme when it comes to messaging. And there's a few things at play right now as far as why we're talking about it right now. There was a Wall Street Journal article that reported on the pressures impacting school-aged children, which really goes hand in hand with a lot of what we've been seeing in recent months. A lot of reporting done around kind of the impact of big tech on children, Instagram and body issues in teenagers, that sort of stuff. I think this article kind of falls into that bucket, that category as well. But the article itself concludes that messaging within iMessage, ultimately, it creates an us versus them mentality. That and they spell out some examples. It ostracizes certain Android users, some of its youngest users. iMessage, of course, has a lot of features that SMS doesn't support, right? It has things like read receipts, has typing indicators, has the memojis, the stickers, the GIFs, that sort of stuff. All that kind of stuff that, at least with SMS, is not used very much. And again, here in the US, I hear all the time from people, because we talk about this on All About Android from time to time. People outside of the US are like, yeah, well, why are you still using SMS? No one here uses SMS anymore. Everyone's using WhatsApp or whatever. But I don't know what to tell you. Here in the US, maybe we're just slow to the uptick or whatever, but there are a lot of people still using SMS. It's kind of like it's kind of the no-brainer, like you always know that's going to reach someone here in the US, no matter what messaging platform they happen to be on. Well, iMessage integrates SMS into its experience. So if you happen to have an iPhone and you're chatting with someone else who has an iPhone, iMessage recognizes it. It enables all these extra features. If that doesn't happen, of course, it still passes over through SMS. But what do iMessage and iPhone users see? They see the green bubble versus the blue bubble that they see when they're connected to another iPhone. And the piece really goes into detail as far as stating the increase in desire among young users to use the service, and the fact that when they're not using an iPhone and they're messaging, they feel there was one teen that reported they said, quote, they dread the ostracism that comes with the green text. Another person that was interviewed said people don't seem to like green text bubbles that much and seem to have this visceral negative reaction to it. Right. And I can totally I understand. Right. I didn't have smart. Yes, I am. A, I am one of those, and B, I was a kid once, and I know what school life is like, and and of course, when I was a kid, we didn't have smartphones, but right. I knew the impact. I knew the kind of the draw of technology then, and I see the incredible draw of technology now, and so I can totally understand how this happens. Do I think Apple's at fault for the fact that kids are ostracizing each other, green versus blue? I mean, I don't know that I can say they are directly at fault, but there are things to consider. And that's what Hiroshi Lockheimer, who is the Google Senior Vice President of Platforms and Ecosystem, said. He went on a tweet storm and basically just kind of pointed out, iMessage can support Android users better. without making iMessage for Android, right? And we know through the Epic versus Apple courtroom battle, there were docs that were shown off that showed, that said, quote, iMessage on Android would simply serve to remove an obstacle to iPhone families giving their kids Android phones. That was Craig Federighi. Another executive said iMessage amounts to serious lock-in. So there's a business incentive to keep iMessage kind of locked down. But what Hiroshi's point is you can still have these benefits of iMessage that iPhone to iPhone still work and interoperate well and create these these kind of like moments of joy with emojis and these games that you can play from iMessage to iMessage. But you can also support this growing standard of RCS, rich communication services, which is essentially meant to be an upgrade to SMS. And almost all Android devices support RCS now. It really is SMS, but with some of the features that you get out of something like iMessage. You get the read receipts, you get the typing indicators, better quality media sharing, all this stuff. And I think Hiroshi's point, I totally agree with. It's, have your cake and eat it too, right? Like Apple, you can support iMessage users and have these special features, but not supporting this growing standard that would actually not just make Android users happy. I think it makes everybody happier because then it kind of levels the playing field a little bit and gives everyone a good experience. But I've been rambling. I know you have thoughts, Micah. What do you think?
I do. So I want to start by going with the psychology of the situation here by talking evolutionarily. We spent a lot more times as human beings living in small tribes. And because of that, we are sort of biologically predisposed to tribalism. And as we age, it is the hope that as human beings, we grow, we become more open-minded, we become more empathetic, and we acknowledge that part of our brain that tends toward tribalism, and we try to circumvent it to be more open to realize that at that time in many years ago, that tribalism was important for our safety. But in the lives we live today, that is less important, and so we don't have to fall into that trap as much. So all of that's to say that when it comes to kids, I can understand why there may be a little bit more of that tribalism in place. But when it comes to someone who's a little bit older, has a little bit more of an evolved brain, a grown brain, I should say, evolved is the wrong word there, developed brain, at that point, for me, it is not that I want to exclude any Android user or, say, oh, you're an ew, gross green bubble. No, it is precisely what you're talking about. It is that the experience is worse in communicating with them. So I want Apple to fix this. I don't want to have to, whenever a group text is set up and there's a green bubble in the mix, that messes things up. I'm not about that. Like we can't say that so much for kids because I think that in some cases that can be a little bit of thing because, again, their brains are not as developed as we are. And in some cases, they have not been taught to try to circumvent that. So I can't speak, like there may be some kids who are kind of into it for the sake of just being like, oh, yes, we're part of an elite club kind of thing. But for adults, it is, and even older young folks, it's just the idea that like it is tough to be able to communicate in the same way that we're used to whenever the person is on Android. And so that dread comes up because it's a worse experience. What do I want? I don't want for that to continue. I want that dread to go away. I want the communication to get better. And I want Apple to adopt RCS if that's what it takes to make that better. I will say that, there are some people who are like, why do the bubbles have to look different? Why does that have to be a thing? I understand why that Apple did not put that feature in place in the beginning specifically for this. Like, oh, let's separate that from this because I totally agree. It wasn't always SMS and iMessage. Apple had to differentiate between the two, and so that's what it's that's the way that it does that. So most of the time, what I'm using it for is whenever someone gives me their number, and I know they're an iPhone user, I type that in. If it doesn't pop up correctly, I go, oh, did I get that number right? If it doesn't turn blue. Or if I'm talking to my mom, who has sometimes her phone is out of signal whenever she goes to certain family members. And I know, oh, she's probably out here. There's less signal. And so that's why I'm getting green bubbles right now, because she's not connected to a data network to do the blue bubble texting. So I find value in the green bubble versus blue bubble that exists outside of any kind of tribalism. But I think that the big thing here is that what you said is true. It's not just about making Android users easier to communicate with iPhone. It's also about just making things better for iPhone too. I want that for that reason. And frankly, I hate that there is, right now, a number of kids who are being left out of conversations with friends from school simply because their family may not make as much money and are unable to afford to purchase an iPhone, or their family has always been like an Android family, and so they bought their kid an Android device so that they can be part of that experience, that same experience. Whatever the reason, that othering, let's not give more opportunity for othering. And, right now there's a huge argument that internet has become a basic need that everyone should be able to be a part of. And people that are being left out of it are being left out of a very important part of our society. And I think that the same applies when it comes to this ability to communicate in the ways that people do. I won't name the company, but my partner used to work for a place where a lot of the communications between employees and the managers happened over a group chat. And there was one person who had an Android device, and she was often left out of conversations that she needed to be a part of because of the difference between the blue bubble and green bubble texting. Like, there are all of these reasons why things should not be the way that they are. And I want to believe that Apple is not choosing to just completely disregard. Yeah, we don't need you to do iMessage on Android. I understand why that's not a thing, because then again, you're also, by that point, you're asking people on Android to download an app that is not just that bothers me more than anything else, because there are also the people who say, well, why don't we all just move to Telegram, or why don't we all just move to Signal, or why don't we all? The more friction you add to communication, each time you do that, like half of the people who are going to participate drop off, and suddenly
people are abandoned. Yeah,
exactly. They're not interested in adding friction. That's why we stick with iMessage instead of me talking to you. I usually talk to you over Slack because I don't have to worry about the green bubble or worry about the I know I could talk to you in text message, but it's just easier for me to talk to you in Slack. So yeah, I do. As an iPhone user and a longtime iPhone user, and as a person who talks almost exclusively to people who are also iPhone users, I still want this to change. And I have to admit that, there were times when I was back when I was on the dating scene, and on occasion when I would exchange a number with a person, and I texted that person, and then there was a green bubble, and I thought, that's interesting. Because it was more just the idea of like, okay, so how is this going to limit things whenever it comes to communication? And also, we won't be able to share photo albums in the same way. And, all those things that start to come up in your mind of the nice features that you get whenever you're both on the same experience. So I'm not going to lie, like that has come up for me too. And if we limited that by Apple adding RCS support, I think that'd be great.
Yeah. Ron Amadio at Ars Technica shared an article that, has just like, it's gone. It's basically caught fire. Like, there's so many comments on this article. It really resonated. But and I agree with some of his points. Overall, his point is that, it's all sour grapes for Google. It's Google failed so hard at messaging that now it's coming back and saying, please support us. And I don't really feel like that's necessarily the case too. I'm not arguing that Google hasn't failed at messaging multiple times. I believe that they have, but I think they also have a really good point. Look, here's a growing standard. Just support the standard. The longer you're not supporting the standard, the more it seems like you're intentionally avoiding the standard to make things more complicated and more difficult. And that I don't agree with. So
at the very least, then, if you're not going to support the standard, then explain why. I think that we've seen a number of times where we've had executives send out emails, and then those emails get picked up by the press where they explain a thing. I would like that. It would have been good. Someone in the chat asked, I thought that you switched to Android. They thought that they had heard me say that on the Tech Guy. No, I didn't switch to Android. I use both devices. I have an Android device with a Mint Mobile SIM in it and an iPhone. So I think what Leo and I were talking about on the show was how we both use both platforms pretty regularly. So that also does play a role in me, wanting to be able to use both platforms, because I do, if there's something on the Android device, the Pixel 6, that I come across and I want to save it for later, I will just text it to myself on my iPhone. And, it depends on how it shows up. It might show up as an MMS, an SMS. It could be a whole mess. So, that's a troublesome.
A messaging mess. All right. Well, coming up, your story of the week, disinformation is everywhere. That's a fact. We're going to talk about that. Let's see what I did there. But first, this episode of Tech News Weekly is brought to you by Acronis. Acronis Cyber Protect. It's the only solution that natively integrates cybersecurity, data protection, management, all to protect endpoints, systems, and data. They have an integration and automation system that provides unmatched protection. Ultimately, that's increasing productivity. It's also decreasing your total costs of ownership. All available in flexible deployment options that are going to fit your needs. Next generation security, of course, this is what it's all about. It's advanced AI-based behavioral detection engine for zero-day attack prevention. So you get reliable backup as well. You get reliable recovery, super important. You get full image and file level backup, disaster recovery, metadata collection for those security forensics after the fact. You get an integrated protection management system, so URL filtering, vulnerability assessments, patch management, remote management. That's all integrated and automated. And you can actually minimize your incidents and improve your productivity as well. So, you're eliminating complexity. The traditional stack of endpoint protection products actually lacks integration. It requires a whole lot more time for management when you're maintaining licenses, when you're installing updates and patches, verifying compatibility after updates, and managing multiple policies using a variety of different user interfaces. Acronis Cyber Protect offers one agent, one management interface, and one license. And that's removing the complexity and risks that are associated commonly with non-integrated solutions. And you can minimize your incidents. Overall, traditional antivirus and backup solutions, they're unable to protect against modern cyber threats. Things have changed, and you need a system that's changing with it. With Acronis Cyber Protect, an AI-based threat detection engine actually leverages backup data to improve detection rates and also avoid false positives. That's super important. You can increase your productivity. So a complex, non-integrated stack of endpoint solutions requires more time to learn and support. It also doesn't benefit from integration and automation. Well, unifying multiple protection technologies into one solution not only increases its reliability, it also decreases the time needed to learn, deploy, and maintain the solution. With Acronis Cyber Protect, you get one integrated solution that delivers complete protection from today's threats. That's going to enable you to streamline your management, cut unnecessary administrative time, and lower total cost of ownership. So avoid the downtime, avoid data loss and security breaches at a lower cost with Acronis Cyber Protect. Go to go go.acronis.com/twit-2. You're going to get a 30-day trial to modernize your cybersecurity and back up with integrated cyber protection. That's go.acronis, ACRONIS, go.acronis.com/twit-2. Check it out for yourself. And we thank them for their support of Tech News Weekly. It's good to have you on board. All right, Micah, what you got for your story of the week?
Yeah, so a couple of organizations, groups, individuals have shared some open letters regarding disinformation, misinformation spread online. We've got an open letter to Spotify, and this is a call from global scientific and medical communities to do better. And then one for YouTube from a huge group of different fact checkers and actually different fact checking organizations. So we'll start with the Spotify one. Surprise, surprise, yet again, Joe Rogan on his, I guess you can call it a podcast, Garbage Cast, shared a bunch of stuff. It's one of the most popular podcasts on the planet, or one of the most listened to podcasts on the planet, I guess. But anyway, he had a person on the show, Dr. Robert Malone. Now, Dr. Robert Malone has been discredited time and time again for his scientific prowess, and on the show claimed that millions of people have been hypnotized into believing facts about COVID-19, and then also people who are in line to get tested for the Omicron variant are an example of something called mass formation psychosis, which is something that somebody somewhere made up as this phenomena that is where a bunch of people start to believe a thing. Mass formation psychosis does not exist; it's not real. But this scientist insisted that it was, and that people are hypnotized in their beliefs about COVID-19. Now, here's the thing. This person has a huge platform, as, again, I think it's 11 million people listen to this podcast. Yeah, and Spotify, as a Spotify exclusive, Spotify is in ways involved in the distribution of this podcast. And so this open letter says, hey, you are responsible for these 11 million people being told something that is patently false, and time again continues to spread information that is patently false. We would like for you to implement a misinformation policy that would help with this thing. And as somebody in the chat is pointing out, constantly Joe Rogan's refrain is anytime someone criticizes him for spreading misinformation, I'm just a comedian. I don't really know, I don't know what's true and what's not. I just have people on my show to talk, and is completely disregarding the fact that he is responsible for providing communication to 11 million people. And as much as it pains me to say, not everybody is as skeptical as they should be. Not everybody has access to the necessary materials to be as educated as they should be. There are so many reasons why a person may be led to believe something that isn't true. I know this is true in part because there's a whole Facebook group, probably multiple Facebook groups, but certainly one Facebook group devoted to people who believe that drinking your own urine is a therapy that will help you, and have a whole Facebook group dedicated to teaching people about the ways of urine therapy. That is a bit of an aside, but it's just to point out, you think that you want to believe, I think, at least I wanted to believe that most people won't be tricked by a thing, but when it comes to it, a lot of people will be tricked by a thing and will be led to believe things. And I think that this pandemic has proven that out. Even maybe some people who we thought were not going to be convinced of certain things who ended up being convinced of certain things. And of course,
especially when you're talking about like large numbers as 11 million listeners.
Yes.
Like it's the same well, actually it's the same in Android world. Like, how many hundreds of millions of users, using Android, even if it's like a 0.05% of this thing that is impacting users, that ends up being multiple millions of people. That's no small number. And it's kind of a similar thing with Joe Rogan. You could have 99% of all those listeners being, and I don't believe it's that, but being, kind of having a skeptical view or critical view of what they're hearing. But it's the other number, like that's not insignificant. Just because it's a small percentage doesn't mean it's a small number.
Yeah. And so I'm going to read a little bit from this first open letter. Throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, Joe Rogan has repeatedly spread misleading and false claims on his podcast, provoking distrust in science and medicine. He has discouraged vaccination in young people and children, incorrectly claimed that mRNA vaccines are gene therapy, promoted off-label use of ivermectin to treat COVID-19, contrary to FDA warnings, and spread a number of unsubstantiated conspiracy theories. Rogan hosted Dr. Robert Malone, who was suspended from Twitter for spreading misinformation about COVID-19. Dr. Malone used the platform to further promote numerous baseless claims, including several falsehoods about COVID-19 vaccines and an unfounded theory that societal leaders have hypnotized the public. Many of these statements have already been discredited. Notably, Dr. Malone is one of two recent JRE guests who has compared pandemic policies to the Holocaust. These actions are not only objectionable and offensive, but also medically and culturally dangerous. You can all read through this letter if you'd like to. It was published at spotifyopenletter.wordpress.com. What I'm curious to see is if this is going to make a difference at all. That is one of the most frustrating parts of this pandemic. I first experienced the whole idea, I think, many of us were confronted with the idea that it is incredibly difficult to change someone's mind during the not even the last election, but the election before that. That was the point when I started to see like, oh man, it's hard to have a conversation with someone and actually get them to change their mind. Then it was doubled down during this past election. And then it was doubled down again when we had Black Lives Matter's protests all over the country due to huge bouts of police brutality, et cetera, et cetera. And then again now with the pandemic. And so I feel like we're all being confronted with the idea that there's so much disinformation and misinformation being spread online. And when that stuff gets rooted in, it becomes so incredibly difficult to change someone's mind, because someone who doesn't want their minds to be changed can easily fall into and sort of embrace not embrace the cognitive dissonance, but embrace the desire to avoid cognitive dissonance by saying, well, how do you know what you're saying is true? How do we know anything is true? How do we know that any fact that's ever existed is a true fact? And it's just like, it's so exhausting and disheartening. So the other one is from YouTube. And this one is a more general one. It wasn't even about a specific, video or something like that. It's just more generally where they've written in the last, and I will say too, YouTube videos are very popular means of spreading misinformation. In the last year, quote, we have seen conspiracy groups thriving and collaborating across borders, including an international movement that started in Germany, jumped to Spain, and spread through Latin America, all on YouTube. Meanwhile, millions of other users are watching videos in Greek and Arabic that encourage them to boycott vaccinations or treat their COVID-19 infections with bogus cures. Beyond COVID-19, YouTube videos have been promoting false cures for cancer for years. In Brazil, it was used to amplify hate speech. In the Philippines, it was used to sort of support, false content with over 2 million views, denying human rights abuses and corruption during the martial law years. And then unsubstantiated accusations of fraud in Taiwan. Over all, time and time again, YouTube is a common place for misinformation and, again, disinformation to be spread. And in the Pointer.org article, that's where the group of fact checkers published this, they actually have some solutions that they suggest, including meaningful transparency, providing context and offering debunks, acting against repeat offenders, and extending the efforts that they have against disinformation and misinformation in languages other than just English. Just because English users are the ones making the most noise about disinformation and misinformation does not mean that those are the only ones that we should be focused on. So many signatories on this open letter as well. And again, I hope that this leads to change, but will it?
I mean, this kind of thing, I feel like this is not the first time that we've seen these sorts of, articles, calls to the CEO of this and that company to make a change. And I mean, all that comes up for me right now is just the sheer fact that we are living in a disinformation age. And it's, like you said, it's exhausting. It's exhausting to maneuver through it. Sometimes it's exhausting to know like what actually is the right approach here, to know whether like, do you clamp down on this entirely? Is there some wiggle room? Is there some gray area? Like if Joe Rogan had invited this person on and then spent the time like being super critical about it, okay, I understand that you believe this, but here are the reasons why you're full of it. Or here are the reasons why a lot of people believe that you are full of it. I don't know. Like I do think that there is some benefit to not completely blanking out the conversation entirely, but bringing someone on and kind of really being critical with them and saying, here's why this is wrong, or what exactly do you have to say about this? It kind of goes back to what we were talking about with the green bubble, blue bubble. Like if Apple acknowledged it, that's one thing, but they don't, and so then you're left wondering, and it's kind of the same thing here. I don't know if that's the right approach, or if the right approach is to, kick Joe Rogan off the platform entirely because this keeps happening. I mean, at the end of the day, and I realize I'm going back to Spotify, but I think it also applies to YouTube and any other platform. These platforms are making decisions as far as what is worth the trouble. And why? Because on the other side of that, they're making an insane amount of money, off of this content. If they weren't, they probably would not feel as, they probably would not let a lot of this stuff slide. But no question, Joe Rogan's pulling in a lot of subscribers for Spotify. Yep. And you end up seeing the true kind of the true colors of the company. Yeah, I mean, that's capitalism at work, right? And yeah, Tuesday on All About Android, Ron was going off about how like his opinion on capitalism is shifting and changing because of modern events, and I think this kind of plays into that. And big tech in general, like at a certain point, it's kind of like, okay, well, but is any of this good for anybody? And maybe that's just us getting older, and I don't know. It's frustrating.
Then we're all old, Jason. Is any of this good for anybody? Is something that. By the way, if anybody's wondering why I kept saying misinformation and disinformation, there is a difference between the two. Misinformation is, let's say I read something and I believed it wholeheartedly, and then I told Jason, that's misinformation. But let's say that I made something up and I gave it to Jason knowing that it was incorrect. That's disinformation. So disinformation is spreading something that you intentionally, that absolutely is not true, and you intentionally spread it anyway. Whereas misinformation is something that you did not know it was a lie, but you shared it with other people and it got out there. So just so you know, that's why I differentiated between the two types of falsities. In either case, they're both damaging. One is just more nefarious than the other is.
Yeah, all right.
All right, Jason, are we done with this episode?
We're done. I'm exhausted now. Yeah. Thanks so much for watching and listening each and every week. We do this show every Thursday. Twit.tv/TNW is where you can go to subscribe and get the show in audio and video formats delivered to you like magic.
Now, here's a bit of true information. If you would like to get all of our shows ad-free, we've got a way for you to do that. It's called Club Twit. It's got a great name. For $7 a month, you too can join the club What's that gonna do when you do? Well, you'll get all of our shows ad-free. It's kind of cool. You get access to this special secret page that has custom feeds just for you that are ad-free versions of the show. You also get access to the Twit Plus bonus feed that has extra content you won't find anywhere else. That might be things that happen before the show, after the show, during the show that get cut out. But also, you'll get some fun stuff like the upcoming AMA with Andy Anatko. If you don't watch it live, you'll be able to check it out there. I know there's one from Mary Jo Foley in the feed. Some other AMAs. I think mine is in there. I was the first one to do an AMA with Aunt Pruitt. And you'll get access to the Discord server. If you're wondering what the heck Discord is, well, I've got some comparisons. If you've ever used Slack or Microsoft Teams, it's a lot like that. It's a place to go and chat with your fellow Club Twit members, but also us folks here at Twit. You can hang out with us too and have a conversation. I was just pulling some text from the chat earlier with the questions that somebody had. And of course, you can always head to irc.twit.tv to chat with us live. But twit.tv/clubtwit to check that out, $7 a month. And then we also had some feedback that folks wanted to support their favorite shows directly and weren't interested in all the extra stuff. So you can get the audio version of the show ad-free through Apple Podcasts. You hop in Apple Podcasts, you type in Tech News Weekly, you find the audio version of the show, and then for $2.99 a month, you'll get the ad-free version of the audio feed. So that's a great way to do that. If you want to tweet at me or follow me elsewhere, I am at Micah Sargent on many a social media network, or head to chihuahua.coffee, CHIHUAHUA.coffee, where I've got links to the places I'm most active online. You can check me out on Tuesdays on iOS Today. And in the future, I also will be once again joining Leo Laporte for The Tech Guy on Saturdays, the radio show where we answer your questions live and help people with their tech. Jason Howell, where can folks find you?
It's easy. At Jason Howell on Twitter. That's all you need to know to find me and my social musings anyways. You can also find me on All About Android every Tuesday, twit.tv/AAA. We just actually welcomed a new co-host, Wen Tu Dao, who's an Android developer to the weekly rotation. Super awesome to have her on as a co-host, offering her kind of developer insights to everything going on with Android. We're really excited to have her on. So announce that on Tuesday. So check out the show. If it's been a while since you listened, check it out again because you're going to have some new perspectives on there on a regular basis. So, but that's it for this show. Big thanks to John Ashley, to Burke there at the studio, also John Slanina, everybody behind the scenes helping us do the show each and every week. Couldn't do it without you. And thanks to you for watching and listening every week, because we could do it without you too. And we'll see you next time on Tech News Weekly. Bye, everybody.
Goodbye.
So you got yourself the brand new latest and greatest iPhone or Samsung smartphone because you heard about all of the beautiful photography those things can create. But for some reason, you're just not quite getting it done when you try to make your photos. Or you got yourself a brand new camera because you were interested in getting started in photography, but your little new inexpensive camera still isn't quite cutting it. Well, you need to check out my show, Hands on Photography, here on Twit. I'm going to show you how to be a better photographer and a better post-processor, and quite frankly, just help you get the most out of that new camera that's either on your phone or the brand new one that you just got for your birthday or gifts or what have you. And it's going to be a lot of fun. So head on over to twit.tv/hop. That's twit.tv/HOP and subscribe today.